Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wow, it is such a great honor to be here this morning. I'm Canadian, so there is an event coming up this Thursday, correct? Called Thanksgiving. So help this Canadian understand what Thanksgiving's all about. Favorite food at Thanksgiving? Turkey. All right. Okay. Mashed potatoes. Okay. Nothing. Oh, wow. How about, I've heard sweet potato pie. That's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. What's that? Oh, help me out. Poutine. Who just said that? Yeah? Poutine. Yeah, wow. I don't think there's poutine for American Thanksgiving. That's what I think. Well, it's great to be here, and I'm absolutely thrilled to celebrate Thanksgiving here this coming Thursday. Grits? Oh man, yeah. Listen, I was driving here this morning, and along the lake, and it's just the colors are absolutely beautiful right now. Isn't it beautiful this time of year? I love it. This is God's country for sure. This area right here. Well, let's grab our Bibles this morning, and let's turn to Psalm 69. Psalm 69 is where we're going to be here this morning in just a few moments. We'll read just 3 verses 30 to 32, in just a few minutes. But for now, let me tell you a story. Some of you maybe know this story. 1999, Harvard University professor named Daniel Simons performs this really fascinating experiment. He gathers together 200 of Harvard's absolute finest. Some of you are university students. You are SWU finest, Clemson finest, Tri-County finest. Do we have any other schools represented here? Bob Jones finest. Okay, awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Finest. Harvard's finest, 200 of them. He sits them down in a lecture hall with a piece of paper and a pen, and he asks them to watch a short video that he has compiled. Just prior to watching the video, the 3-minute video, Simons tells the students that they're going to be watching a video of 6 people passing a basketball around in a circle. Maybe you've seen this video. It's called The Monkey Business. Yeah, 3 of the ball passers will be wearing white shirts. 3 will be wearing black shirts. Simons tells some of the viewers in the lecture hall to carefully count the number of times that the white team touches the ball. The other students are what? Asked to touch or count the black. Yeah. So how many times the black team touches the ball? Very, very straightforward explanations or directions given to a very, very high-functioning group of very, very capable people, just like you. So the 3-minute video begins, and Simons observes 200 of Harvard's finest attentively watching the video of the 6 people passing a basketball around and painstakingly counting the number of touches. 1, 2, 3, 4. What Simons doesn't tell the students is that 30 seconds into the video, a person who's dressed in a gorilla suit will walk directly through the ball passers. And sure enough, 30 seconds into the video, a big, black, hairy gorilla appears and walks directly through the ball passers and then disappears. And so immediately after the video is actually ended, Simons stands up in the lecture hall and he asks the 200 students to write down how many ball touches they counted. Simons then asks them to write down with a simply stated yes or no if they've seen anything unusual with the clip. The last question is even more specific. He says, "Did you see a big, black, hairy gorilla anywhere in this video?" Amazingly, about 50% of Harvard's finest 100 students say, "What? Black gorilla? No. What are you talking about?" Well, what this experiment actually shows and confirms was Simons' suspicion that a close analysis of what we humans regularly experience reveals that we are actually really unaware of many of the details in our environment. It reinforces that we are often really oblivious to significant changes in our world because of what Simons calls inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness. Missing key aspects of reality because we are focused on other things. Well, as we approach and as we celebrate Thanksgiving here in the next few days, and as we enter into Advent, Christmas season, I believe that God would be really pleased today if we challenged ourselves, if we stretched ourselves to see aspects of God that maybe we tend to overlook because of our own inattentional blindness. In other words, the question is this: are there key aspects of who God actually is, or what God is actually doing around us, that you're missing and I'm missing because we're too focused on counting the balls being passed around the circle? This morning, what we're trying to do is we're trying to confront our perceptions, our ideologies, our hidden presuppositions about who we think God is. But here's the tricky part about this. The tricky part is that confronting what is in your spiritual backpack is a really, really hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do, to actually step back and try to look beyond ourselves and to actually consider the lenses through which we see the world and see ourselves and see God. You with me this morning? Okay, good. Excellent. Hold on to those thoughts. We're going to come back to inattentional blindness in just a few minutes. But for now, let's read now what may at first seem like a disconnected passage there in Psalm 69. If you have your Bible, read along. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. This is what it says, verse 30. I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. Let's say that together this morning. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. Again, I will. One more time. I will. Good. This will please the Lord more than an ox or a bull with horns and hoofs. It says hoofs in NRSV. I don't know why it doesn't say hooves. It says hoofs. Hoofs. Plural for hoof, I guess. 32. Let the oppressed see it and be glad. You who seek God, let your hearts revive. I'd like us to place our attention this morning on that short phrase that you just said, actually, in the second part of verse 30. The psalmist says, I will magnify God with thanksgiving. So here's the question this morning, and actually I want to invite some feedback. When you hear the word magnify, what comes to mind? Feedback, magnify. What comes to mind? Enlarge. Okay, somebody else. Make what? Make greater. Good. Excellent. Yeah, what else? See clearly. Okay, awesome. See clearly. Good. Magnify. What is it? What comes to mind? King Saul? Exalt. Okay, all right. Clearly this Canadian can't hear. Yeah. King Saul, no. Exalt. Yes. Okay, all right. What you just said. This fan, I can't actually hear. What did you say?
To focus on.
To focus on. Okay, good. Excellent. One more. One more. Magnify. Something proportionate? Blow it out of proportion. Good, good. Excellent, good. So aside from the religious connotation to that word, magnify, for some of you, evidently, I'm actually intrigued that this actually came out. The word magnify, it triggers the picture of maybe a science lab, actually, to make something larger. That's really fascinating to me. A microscope or a magnifying glass. And think with me, what do microscopes and magnifying glasses do? What do? They enlarge things. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. They make small things appear larger than they actually are, right? And so I brought a few pictures along of some microscopic pictures. Do we have a few of those? Okay, all right. There's a mosquito. I don't think I'm ever going to go outside ever again with that picture. Earwax. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, look at the cluster of earwax. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, a dust mite. There's none here, thankfully. Dust mites. Yeah. A grain of salt. Any of you played Tetris before? It looks kind of like Tetris, doesn't it? Yeah. The next one. Ooh, okay. All right. We've got a dentist drill bit and mascara brush bristle. Oh, I'm glad I don't wear the mascara. Wow. Mascara brush bristles. Ooh. That's kind of horrifying. What's that? That looks like it hurts. Yeah, you bet it does. Yeah. These are small objects. Please take those down. Yes. Yeah, please. Yeah. These are small objects that have been magnified by a microscope. Someone has taken something that's really, really, really tiny and small, and using a microscope, they've actually enlarged them larger than they actually are, so that they actually appear bigger than they actually are. That's one way, and it's a very common way, I might add, of understanding the concept of magnification, making small things big, making small things big. But welcome, Wesleyan, there's another way of thinking about magnification that I want to encourage us to think about for a few moments this morning. And maybe we're a little bit less prone to thinking about magnification this way, but I want to encourage you to think for a moment about a telescope. Any of you looked through a telescope before? Of course, yeah. A telescope this morning. If microscopes magnify small things so that they actually appear bigger than they actually are, I want you to think about a telescope for a few moments with me. What does a telescope do? Yeah. Yes, yeah. Telescopes take things that for many of us kind of seem, I don't know, insignificant, like planets and stars, those sorts of things. And telescopes magnify these objects so that we actually catch a glimpse of how truly enormous they actually are. Telescopes take big, big, big things, which incidentally to us seem kind of insignificant, and make them appear as big as they actually are. Here's a few mind benders about our universe. Did you know that our sun is one of 100, catch this, billion stars just in the Milky Way galaxy alone? And scientists believe that there are at least 100 billion other galaxies in the observable universe. That's mind-boggling, huh? That's big. That's really, really big. Traveling at the speed of light, it would take 100,000 years to hypothetically travel across the Milky Way galaxy, and the galaxy that we call the Milky Way is just one of 100 billion. Friends, that's mind-boggling. That's mind-bending. That's astonishing, isn't it? It's amazing what science reveals about the sheer size of this universe, of God's universe. You see, telescopes and other scientific instruments and different tools can help us just to begin to wrap our minds around the vastness and the sheer size of God's creation. So notice this morning we're tracking in two different directions. Okay? In one direction, we can magnify things that are really, really, really small, tiny, 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 so that they appear larger than they actually are, like, say, using a microscope. But in the other direction, we can magnify things that are really, really, really big so that we can begin to realize how big and awesome they actually are, like using a telescope. I want to put it even more simply to all of us this morning. Microscopes make little things big, and telescopes make big things big. You with me this morning? Just nod or smile. Smile, that would be great. Now let's bring the passage that we just read. You're with me. Good job. You're tracking. Psalm 69, verse 30 back into play. Follow along with me. When the psalmist says, I will magnify God, which kind of magnification do you think the psalmist has in mind here? Is the psalmist saying God is really, really, really small, and therefore, like a microscope, we've got to make God seem bigger than God really is? Of course not. No. The psalmist is saying, you know what? God is really, really, really big, and therefore, like a telescope, we got to acknowledge how big God truly is. I'll ask it even more simply this morning. Do you perceive God as really big or really small? Good. Excellent. An emphatic big. That's good. Yeah. Does God depend on us to magnify him, to prop him up so God seems bigger and better than he really is? No. It's more accurate, isn't it, to say that there's nothing, that there's nobody superior to God, that God is as big as big gets. Friends, that is an important question for all humans, every human being to answer, and it has enormous practical implications and ramifications to our faith and to our destiny. Listen, when it comes to magnifying God, metaphorically speaking, we are not called to be microscopes, nervously propping up and magnifying a puny little God. See, God doesn't need to be magnified like the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, who gets found out in the end to be an old, cranky blowhard with a microphone. Instead, let's remind ourselves this morning that when it comes to magnifying God, you and I are called to be telescopes, to confidently think and hear and feel in ways that make God look as big and amazing and great and omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent as God really is. Is that not a more accurate picture of what it means to magnify God? But hold on. There's a tension that we feel, isn't there? And now it's time for us to reintroduce where we started with inattentional blindness. You see, we have a problem magnifying a big, big God, don't we? But maybe the problem isn't God. Maybe the problem's you and me. The Apostle Paul describes our propensity toward inattentional blindness in Romans chapter 1, verses 19 to 20. This is what he writes. Ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that God has made, Milky Ways and all that stuff. So they, and they includes you and me, people. So we are without excuse, Paul says. For though we knew God, we did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. Instead, we became futile in our thinking, and our senseless minds were darkened. Am I the only one who wonders how my blindness makes my eyes unseeing and my ears unhearing to what God is actually up to? Maybe you'd admit this morning that you find it kind of easy to ignore and to forget the reality of the greatness of God. We're prone, aren't we, to miss opportunities to telescope our big God. You get it. We're about to enter Christmas season, the most insane time of the year for most of us. Huh? We'll get so busy counting all the balls being passed around in the circle that we will probably, let's go with possibly, completely miss the things that God is doing right in front of us. God help us not to miss Jesus Emmanuel, God with us. I want you to think for a moment about a time in your life when you sense God with you. Okay? You caught a glimpse of God. I want you to go there in your mind for 30 seconds. Think back, a memory in your mind of a moment where you sense God with you, God with us. Let's go there. I can think of youth camps as a teenager for me. And for me, it's a worship experience as a college student. God was there. God was there in a real way. And I'm thinking about ways in which God met Christy, my wife, and I early on in our marriage. God was there, God with us. I can think about in the last 2 years, experiences that I've had at Southern Wesleyan University. God was there. Worship experiences, quiet times with God, moments with God, where I sensed in a very real way that God was there. Countless examples of God's work in my life. Times when I felt God's presence in a strong way. And of course, you can think of many, many examples of right? Times when you have experienced God in a very, very real way and you shouted and you jumped for joy maybe, or maybe you just sat quietly in place. It was just one of those sacred, holy moments where you're like, like Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6. Or maybe it was a time when you were so excited that you danced. Even Wesleyans dance, right? You dance, the holy Wesleyan dance, perhaps, right? Just a time, a response where you just recognize, God, you are with me. You're with me. God, you're here. God spoke to you, and you knew it. You experienced those moments, and you said to God, I've experienced you in such a very real and awesome way. But then, a few weeks later, a few days later, a few hours later, discouragement, doubt, worry, busyness, blindness. God, I don't see you. Where are you? God, where are you? I can't find you. I don't see you anywhere. Friends, it is intriguing to me that a large part of the Bible that we read is about reminding us to simply do the things that deep down we already know we should be doing. Huh? It's the psalmist in Psalm 103 saying, "Praise the Lord, may I never forget the good things that God does for me." It's Paul in his letter to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 18 and 19, when he prays that the eyes of our hearts would be open. You know that song, right? Open the eyes of my heart. This is where it comes from. The eyes of our hearts would be opened, Paul prays, so that we can see the greatness of God's immeasurable power. So as we wind down this morning, let me ask, how do you magnify God? How do you magnify God? How do you act like a telescope? How do you take something theoretical and big like this, and how do you actually make it practical? Well, maybe it starts here. Maybe it starts with us simply and humbly acknowledging this morning, and to ourselves, and ultimately to God, and admitting our inherent tendency to be inattentionally blind and forgetful. Maybe it means taking our obsessive eyes off of the balls being passed around and asking God, with no expectations on our end, no parameters, not on our terms, on God's terms, God, would you open the eyes of my heart? And when we take a good look around, what do we see when we do that? Well, we see that God has had his hand on you, church, since Pastor Josh left. And we see that God has had his hand on you through a pretty extensive pastoral search in the last several months, huh? That God has walked with you and brought you some amazing people in your life, in your job, at school. Met some amazing people from One Life. Did you guys know each other a year ago? Didn't even know each other. Isn't that amazing how God has brought you all together? That's so amazing. That God is with you through the storms of life. Did you know that? That God is amazingly, think about this, that God is amazingly weaving things together right in front of you without usurping your freedom to choose or make decisions. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. That God is changing you and me and ordering the universe all at the very same time. Milky Way, all that. You personally, yes. Look around. We serve an amazingly great God. You see, God is big. And when we magnify God, when we telescope God, we acknowledge how big God really is. And the natural outflow of that, as the psalmist puts it, we magnify God with thanksgiving. And so the question in closing this morning is simply this: are you mindful of what God is doing around you? In us, in you as a church, in our community, are you aware of what God is doing? I trust that you are. I trust that you are. Friends, God is our giver. God is our benefactor. We are indebted to God. And as we approach Thanksgiving here later this week, I believe that God is calling us once again to not just eat turkey, and that's good, and not just watch football, and that's good, and eat grits, and that's all good too, and mac and cheese, that's all good. And as we approach Advent, the busiest time of year, I believe that God is not calling us just to work ourselves into a big old stress ball. Instead, more importantly, God calls us to magnify him with thanksgiving, to recognize our weakness and his strength, our emptiness and his richness. our brokenness and his holiness, to marvel at God's grace that meets us precisely where we are and invites us into a relationship with him, the King of the universe. Friends, that is an incredible gift for us to ponder as we leave here this morning. And so may we be telescopes, welcome Wesleyan, that make God appear as big and awesome as God truly is. And may our prayer today be the prayer of the psalmist. We will praise the name of God with a song. We will magnify God with thanksgiving.